82% of women that use direct mail coupons like Super Saver. Men has been drastic change for us. 8 years ago, only 32% of men use coupon packs like we have. That figure nowadays is up to almost 72%. You know, some of our most sought after coupons are golf coupons. So we have a lot of guys that love the golf coupons when we have them. Another thing that's pretty interesting that I found is that 18 to 24-year-olds, the usage has gone up tremendously. Average, they say a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds decide where they're going to eat, what they're going to purchase, all based on couponing and advertising they find at special deals. So who is our customer? Well, it's 18 to 65. Income, if you have make a personal income of $40,000 or above, and you have a 4-year college degree, they say that you're 33% more likely to use direct mail coupons than the average person. Well, the study that we actually had done in Augusta told us that men fell right in about 72%, and that women were right around 87%. The amount of homes that actually go through our package and open up and look is 89.7%. So I ask you, what other advertising that 9 out of 10 people are going to stop and take a look at your business? Go to supersaversaugusta.com, register to get our email blast on the 5th of each month, and every month we'll send them directly to you so you can look at them. And here's our promise. We'll only send you coupons. So make sure that you go today and register, and we want to thank you again for all the patronage that you've given us through all the years.
Good evening, and welcome to Comcast Community Concerns. I'm your host, Ben Hasan. Welcome to the second portion of our program, our conversation with Professor Malcolm Cash. Professor Cash, once again, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Well, Professor Cash, on the first segment of this program, I asked you last week in terms of why we're here in Augusta. So there's some other reasons that you're here in Augusta as well, and what are those reasons are?
Oh, my stepdaughter and I were coming from North Carolina A&T, and she's a former student at the Ohio State University, and so it was important, I think, to keep students connected to college, and so she's preparing for a master's program there, and I'll be tomorrow at Spelman and Georgia State.
Okay. Also, I said on the end of last week's program that my first question is going to be to you: if Dr. King was alive today, how would he feel about the election? But before we get into that, let me ask you this, something about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. This is a Negro History Month. We know started as a week. In reading his book, he said that he don't think that African American has been educated. He has been trained. He's been trained to fail. What is your position on that?
First of all, I want to celebrate Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who started African American History Month, which, as you said, began as a Negro History Week in the early 1900s. I think it's true. I think there's no greater crisis. The reason I chose the field of education, having been poorly educated myself in the public schools, being a high school dropout, I was in the 9th grade, the 10th grade, the 10th grade, and the 10th grade. I was at a 0.50 GPA, at what should have been my senior year. But Mr. Hasan, I was reading 150 books a year. So I was very precocious, intellectually driven, but had no mentoring, no models, and a great portion of why is what Dr. Carter G. Woodson's talking about. The content of the education was alienating to me and uninteresting. And once I began to read history on my own and learn the truth about the history of America, particularly vis-a-vis African Americans, I became very disenchanted, very angry. And so I sort of withdrew because it was all I knew to do. But had there been more African Americans in the school system, and I think that's a combination of we need to choose to go into education more, as well as we've been historically excluded. So I think African American history is very vital. I think it's 12 months a year, not one, but it's good to have a month to celebrate it. And personally, I'm glad that it's in February. It begins the new year off. You have W.B. Du Bois, President Abraham Lincoln, Alice Walker, not Muhammad Ali, but W.B. Du Bois are all born, and Toni Morrison are all born in February. So Fred Douglass is born in February. So it's a really key month insofar as celebration of particular African Americans.
Okay, so how do we get beyond the point if we buy the theory of Dr. Woodson in terms of we have not been educated, we've been trained to fail. So at what point in time, what do we need to do in terms of truly educating ourselves?
Three things real briefly in the interest of time. One, we take the responsibility as I did as a 16-year-old. I went into the library unasked. No one said, Malcolm, here's a book. I happened to see a book called Taking the Wolf by the Ears on Thomas Jefferson. And I thank God every day I picked that book up and I read it. No one ever put a book in my hand.
What was in that book that was interesting?
The subtitle was Thomas Jefferson and the Question of Slavery. And I can say to you, Mr. Son, I had never read a serious book all my life. I've read Nancy Drew and comic books, things like that. And I don't know what made me pick it up. But again, I thank God that I did. When I read that book and read the history of America toward me and my people, it helped me understand the ghetto better. It helped me understand my own disinterest in school. It helped me understand why African Americans had not succeeded in certain areas that I frankly subconsciously had assumed was because of our inferiority. It gave me a roadmap to transformation personally. So I think one is we take personal responsibility. Two, I think the school system needs to be radically reformed to be more inclusive, not just in terms of African American history, but Native American, et cetera. And lastly, I think that you set up your own schools. You set up an alternative school system to the school system that sometimes may exclude you, which we see often with the Catholic school system. They want the Catholic philosophy of life to be taught. They build their own schools. They teach the Catholic philosophy of life. I agree with that kind of analysis.
Well, pretty much what you just said. I mean, I can embrace and support everything that you just mentioned. But as you move across the country, and I'm assuming you do travel across the country,
yes,
right? As you espouse your views, how much support are you getting for the ideas that you're sharing with the American public?
Well, very little, and that's okay, but for two reasons. One, you receive very little because most people responding are coming out of an educational matrix which have prepared them to give the answers that they often believe are their own. I'll give you one example. When I talk to young African-American males who dress a certain way, behave a certain way, and act a certain way in general, they would tell me with a straight face, I chose to dress this way. I chose to listen to rap music. I chose my behavior. And my question is, if I've traveled 20 states in a year and saw 20 different groups of young people look alike, dress alike, act alike, and you don't know each other, how'd that happen? So I understand that the political dynamics is we are all socialized through the media, we're socialized through the educational system, so I expect the kind of reaction. Secondly, I understand this. When you begin to challenge a system to change it at the beginning, there's going to be resistance. In 1955, when Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement began, there was not an acceptance. There was fighting back, there was the attempt to shut the boycott down, there was resistance. And so when you're bringing forth an ideas that threaten the existing political order, you should accept. When George Washington said to King George, free us, King George's response was not to say, okay, it was to say, let's have a war to keep you a colony. So you should expect that if you're going to challenge a system, that there's going to be resistance to it.
So what about some of the comments that you made just now in saying that as you begin to ask these young men and they begin to say the things, say that this is their idea, but at the same time across 20 states, there's some uniformity there, but yet still I independently made this decision, which you know is virtually impossible, and that be your point at that point in time. But as we, as adults, what role are we playing or have neglected in not getting more involved in our young people's lives? How much responsibility do we bear, if any?
I think you bear the most of it. The child came from your body, came from your home. Before they see school at 5 years of age, you are with them. They come home to your house every night, every weekend, every summer. They're your children, in spirit as well as legally. So I think the primary responsibility is always on the family. I also think if we're paying tax dollars, we should get something for those tax dollars, which is an inclusive educational system. See, too often, Mr. Hasan, we choose. I'm not going to choose my left hand or my right. I need both of them. And so the left hand might be my family, and the right hand is the public school system. I'm paying tax dollars. And so I think it's important that families take the responsibility. Turn off the television, buy your children quality educational with YouTube. I mean, YouTube means that you can go to an iPhone or the internet and just punch in Malcolm X speech, punch it up, bring 8 children in the room and say, look at this speech called The Ballad of the Bullet, now teach. And you don't have to ask anybody, there's no one who can stop you from doing that. So the internet has empowered us to be able to educate our children. The public libraries are free, we pay for them. So there's no reason that our churches and access, our homes historically have been educational centers in the past. Many of the black historic colleges started in somebody's basement. Spelman and Morehouse started as very small places, and now look at them. Howard University started very small. So use your public space, your personal space, and collective spaces to educate and inform your children, which is not the same thing as brainwashing. Brainwashing is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about educate your children to the mistakes of your community, to the best of your community, the mistakes of the country, and the best of the country.
Why is it so hard for us to accept the mistakes of our country? Case in point, I heard you last week and your call on 94.7, and one of the points that you made in some of the books that you would encourage us to read, and two of those books were by Randall Robinson, same author, which were, one was The Debt, and you say, was, you know, as African American in this country, we were excited about that book, but then the one came, The Reckoning, and all of a sudden we were not so excited, because at that point they talked more about it, more of a personal responsibility as an individual, as a community. Why is it so hard and difficult for us to accept that, talk about personal responsibility and hold each other accountable?
Well, one is it's hard to change personal habits because you get mired into one way of doing them. Two, you have a generational gap of where young people just see the world vastly different than their elders. These young people have not had to sit on the back of a bus. They have not been called some of the names, and I don't mean personally, I mean signs on doors. They don't have some of the vivid memories. On the other hand, the older people in the community today have not had to face AIDS in the same way. Homicide is the leading cause of death. The total breakdown of the family infrastructure, no economic stability. And so we have two generations that often struggle to hear each other, to respect each other, and to value the genius of each other. And I think one of the bridges that I try to play, I'm 45 years of age, so I'm about 20 to 25 years older than my college students. I'm also 20 to 25 years younger than my parents' generation. So in your mid-40s, I feel as if you can really act as a kind of bridge. I see myself as a community bridge to try to bring different groups of people together, because we have to learn from each other. I think lastly, if I acknowledge a mistake, I now have the challenge to change that mistake. We have unfortunately are mired in a very narrow political kind of paradigm. For example, real quickly, going back briefly to President Barack Obama, the most beautiful and powerful internal dynamic I hope from his presidency, his candidacy and his presidency, is to shift the political power base of African Americans in this country away from the black church to traditional spheres of politics, of economic, business, technology, and political leadership. It made sense for the first 100 and something years that the black church would be our base. Prior to the Voting Rights Act, that's all we had. Since then, we now have an opportunity to interface with the traditional paradigms of power, and unless we master that realm, and so it's very hard for older preachers to give up. On the other hand, when we ignore them, one of the critiques I would offer of President Barack Obama, the way Jesse Jackson has been treated, I think has been deplorable. Here's a man who set the foundation. He laid the foundation for much of the success. He's been all but ignored in policy, all but ignored in celebration. So if we want the older community to make room, we cannot discard them and put them to the side as if they haven't made great sacrifice and don't have much more to offer to our future.
Well, you're going to definitely do a follow-up on that on Reverend Jesse Jackson when we come back from commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Once again, you're watching Comcast Community Concerns. I'm your host, Ben Hasan. My guest once again is still is Professor Malcolm Cash. Professor Cash, you said a couple of things that you may mention of Reverend Jesse Jackson. You felt that he's been treated deplorable. And you also say that you think at the same time that you, and I'm not sure what you meant, or did I misread you and misunderstand you in saying something about you hope the leadership move away from the black church. But here's my first question. In terms of Reverend Jesse Jackson, I mean, did not he build a sense of distrust in terms of made some comments that he made in South Carolina in reference to, at that time, Senator Obama. And then at the same time, he made another comment that got more exposure when he said that Senator Obama was talking down to black people. Right. And with that, he's saying I should pretty much castrate him. Now, here's my point in that. I took that very personally because I understood that was more of a spiritual thing there, because that's how we reproduce ourselves, and he didn't want this mindset to reproduce here. And at that point in time, the comments that the senator was making was personal responsibility. It was right after Father's Day. And so with that, did not he open the door? Now, it's still up to our president now to forgive him and move on, but did not he open the door, or did you think the door was never open?
I'll say the following real briefly. We made a false distinction in the 60s of choosing Malcolm or Martin, and we lost because of it. So I refuse to choose between President Barack Obama and Jesse Jackson. They're both from my community. They both are great leaders, and I respect both, and I support both. I don't agree with Reverend Jesse Jackson's statements. I do think he's right about the comment he made about then Senator Obama taking the black community to task. Not that it's wrong, but that he didn't take the other community to task. There's the difference. I think Reverend Jackson would have had no problem with him saying personal responsibility. That has been his message his entire career. But to come in public and say, black community, be more responsible, and call us by name in our community, I have no problem with that. Now I want to see you go to the white community and look at them and say, and racism, and call it what it is in public like you did with the black community, and I think everyone would be satisfied. But when you take us to task and then go to their community and you're silent, I disagree with that. And so I believe Senator then Obama was wrong. I think Jesse Jackson should have corrected him. The personal castration was an unfortunate comment. I think Jesse Jackson should, whatever his personal issues was, he should have said them out loud. There's nothing to whisper about. We are all political leaders. Let me lastly say this. Senator McCain had a lot of things to say. Senator Clinton took Obama to task. He made her his Secretary of State. So other people, George Bush spoke harshly of you. You went and had cordial relationship with him. So if you show the capacity to be forgiven, bipartisanship, and then you leave a man out who for 30 years set the foundation for your success in Chicago. Senator Obama didn't accidentally choose Chicago. He chose Chicago because of the success of Mr. Mayor Harold Washington. He states that. So he's on record of saying, I chose Chicago because of the work that Jesse Jackson and a core of leaders had done there. He simply deserves, in my view, to be treated much better than he's been treated. He made unfortunate remarks. Well, Tehran has made unfortunate remarks. We're going to sit down with them. We're sitting down with the Iranians. We're sitting down with the Iraqis. So we can sit down with any other person, but now with Senator Jesse Jackson, the only response is to ignore him. I think that's wrong.
So do you think now, I mean, but you know his son also, to some degree, I can see it's an absolute, but he made comments, but like you say, he probably was addressing more of the comments and not the whole shebang in terms of that, but talking about his son, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. He made some comments as well.
I read
which were that he was appalled that his father made the comments.
Right. He's a politician.
Okay.
He's a son, but he's a politician. Okay. Who wants an opportunity to succeed, and I'll leave it at that.
You said something that's very interesting to me, but it's been a history here that I think has done us more of a disservice at this stage in this country, in my mind. And that's because, but I did hear you say also, we just have to be consistent. All I ask is to be consistent, right. And that is many of the things that are troubling us. None in our community, we don't want to talk about it publicly, even to the black community. Right. You know, we would talk about it privately, many of our politicians will, about the troubles that we have and the concerns about our youth killing one another and the baggy pants and all those kind of things. But we won't talk about it publicly, even among one another. Are we doing ourselves a disservice by not having these public conversations?
Oh, tremendous. First of all, they're already known because the residue from your children killing each other and going to prison is shown. So their failure to address it in public. Mr. Hasan, my greatest role is as a father. I have a wonderful 19-year-old daughter at Spelman. Her name is Ayana, a beautiful child. My first responsibility, more than as an educator, more than as any other thing, is to take care of the child I help bring into the world. That is a message we have to say out loud. I know too many young black males who are not taking personal responsibility for children, and not just young black males, by the way, that they brought into the world. That has to be said out loud. The difference is they lose respect for us, and rightfully so, when we take them to task, and then we don't take the criminal justice system to task for flooding our community with drugs. And I don't mean the criminal justice system flooding them. I mean the criminal justice system will arrest 15, 18, 20-year-old boys, but the people who control the drug trade, no arrest. So when they hear us speak critically to them, but let off the hook the larger infrastructure, how can they take us to task? Because now it looks as if we're real concerned and we have a lot of insight on them, but not on the whole system. We have to be more responsible with our own education. We have to be more responsible as a community around environmental concerns, around economy, spending in black communities. If black people won't spend with other black entrepreneurs, well, how is the black community going to move forward? So we need to be taken to task. But those who would take us to task must take other communities to task in addition to ours in order for the black people to listen to you.
You said something much earlier too when we were talking about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. I think you made mention in terms of, what was it there? I think it was in terms of your own personal education. You was reading 150 books a year and what have you. But at the same time, if you had not picked up the book in reference to the Thomas Jefferson, you would have never known some of the ills that was in our community because you thought it was just naturally inferior. Do you see the people who mostly represent us across this nation, African Americans in particular here, that still feel that inferiority complex and won't talk to us as though we can compete as like everybody else does?
That's a good question. First of all, before I forget, happy birthday to Toni Morrison. Okay. Today is Toni Morrison's birthday, celebrating black history and black literature.
And we're pre-taping this on February the 18th. Okay.
I think you're partly right. I don't know what the motives are of them not speaking to the community. I think one legitimate reason we sometimes don't speak to the community, I give a speech that's critical of the black community. And then that next day, other things I said is clipped out, and you only show that on the Rush Limbaugh show. And so it makes it look like I, as an African American, is attacking my own community. When you give speeches and when you talk in public, you can't control the final product of what you say, and your words can be manipulated, taken out of context, edited out. So I think there's a part of the reluctance on that part. I think part of the other reluctance is some black people genuinely believe we have to put the past behind us and move forward. And while I don't fully agree with that, I do think that sometime we can get mired in talking about the past. We need to be looking at the same time forward to 2009, 2010, and doing as much for our young people then as talking about what happened in the 60s. Lastly, I think we should celebrate a more diverse group of black leaders, of black writers, of black artists, of black political figures. And so one of the dangers of talking about the past all the time is you end up neglecting the young, talented group of leaders that you have now, like the governor of Massachusetts, the young man, Mr. Davis, who's running for governor of Alabama. It's important to talk about Reverend King, but it's important to talk about Mr. Davis and help him become the governor in 2010. And sometimes the fear is if you talk about the past, it mires the question of a candidate only around race and not around what he or she also brings to the table.
I agree with you wholeheartedly in terms of something you said much earlier about controlling the message, in terms of we don't have absolute control. But I think in this day and time across this nation, we are more in control because we're in different brands of media. So we're on television like we are here. I have absolute control of who I bring to the show. We have radio programs. We have newspaper, one or two, probably in major cities across this country. We have more control of that message than ever before, but we don't seem to be resonating. If we brought the same type of energy, I believe, and I'm getting your opinion on it, I'm stating the fact, but I'm asking your opinion at the same time, is we get those media outlets like a lot of them did in terms of President Obama, Senator Obama at the time, making sure that his message get out there, that we inform the African-American community at large about his candidacy and the vitality of it. If we do that and realize that medium, why should we, at this point in time, back away from doing the same thing and pushing our community to the next level? Shouldn't we be doing that more so now than as well as we did when he was running for president?
Oh, no question.
So otherwise, my point is I think we have more control and really don't understand it than we ever had before.
Well, the control issue is murky in my mind. The person who controls is the person who pays for it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that seeing a black person at the head necessarily means that they have the control. I think that in order for working class people in general, and the African American community in particular, to really impact politics, we have to do two things real brief. One is we have to develop more of an entrepreneur base and begin to develop African Americans to use technology to develop things like Yahoo, like eBay, like the whole kinds of things that we see imploding on the internet. We are not founding those, but yet we're participants. So moving from the consumer base and becoming more of an entrepreneur base. Secondly, I think we have to begin to train our young people for political leadership. Training them. I believe that the reason we are more successful in sports is we train our young people. They don't come out better basketball players. They're not great singers at birth. Our culture supports that, monitors it, invests in it. We now have to do the same thing around political leadership, entrepreneurship, and education. If we in the African American community will put as much interest and investment, when my child goes to a basketball game, and she sees 3,000 black people in the stands, she knows that's what we believe in, speeches aside. If on the other hand she goes to a debate and sees 5, she also knows that's what we don't value. What would it mean, Mr. Hasan, to reverse that? A basketball game where 10 people show up and a debate where 3,000 show up. It would signal and investing in them financially. If we start a basketball team, we fly the kids all over the country. We start a debate team, they can't get across town. So they see that we have not invested in their education on the same level we have in sports. We as the community have the opportunity to change that, and that's what I'm attempting to do with the Katrina Leadership Project, to signal to young people, my passion for you is in education, your intellect, your dreams, your capacity to change the country, not necessarily just into sports.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to ask you a question. We're going to finally get to the question about if Dr. King was alive, how would he view this election, but also whatever happened to a man's interpret thing to ways. We'll be right back. We're going to take a commercial break.
The Augusta Regional Airport embraces the vision of Augusta and the CSRA.
As we bring in more visitors, more businesses, this is the first impression that they're going to have of Augusta. We will leverage this asset to a brighter future for the city.
This is going to be such a huge asset to the economy of the whole area.
Augusta Regional Airport. Fly there, fly home.
Welcome back. Once again, you're watching Comcast Community Concern. My guest still is Professor Malcolm Cash. Professor Cash, you wanted to make some comments there about what you was meaning about entrepreneurship before I pose my next question. Go ahead.
Take this wonderful program we have here. What would it mean to have this program, a similar program such as this, and the host is a 15-year-old? And this is what they do. This is how they get paid at 15. Instead of working at McDonald's, this is how they get paid. Someone is doing the lighting, someone is doing this, someone is interviewing, they're writing the scripts, they're organizing budgets at 15, at 17. So I'm very interested in a preparation and training our young people. That, to me, is what Carter G. Woodson meant. Black history means more than anything else, as James Baldwin said, the present. History means the present, not merely the past. So when I think of Black history, I don't think of just Carter G. Woodson and Ida B. Wells and Lorraine Hansberry and Fred McNeil and people like that. I think of young people like my nephew and niece who are here today, Trey and Ashley. I think of my daughter, I think of my stepdaughter, Keela. I think of young people and what they can do currently. And if I empower them, that's Black history at its best celebration.
And that's a great point, because most of the time we start looking back, we're talking more about ourselves and not focusing on the young people.
Right.
We're still trying to have our moment in the sun.
Right, and I think
unconsciously that's what's happening.
Precisely. I think they need that training, and then we move to the side. And again, I love to use sports metaphors because a lot of young people in particular can get to it. The coach of Phil Jackson, he had his day, and he's still a part of the game. But he knows it's Kobe's turn. So Kobe's the star, he's still the coach, because without his guidance and leadership, Kobe wouldn't excel. But at the same time, imagine if Phil wants to be the player. Yeah. I don't think we want to see that. So we have to understand it's our young people's time, but they still need our leadership and guidance. 25-year-olds, I don't know about running the country, but at the same time, if we're not preparing them, when it is their turn, they won't be ready.
Okay. If Dr. King was alive today, what would he say about this election?
I think he would be exhilarated about the election. I think he would be exhilarated about the state of America and troubled to see that still 13 out of 15 southern states have continued to vote for an agenda that often is at the most narrow base. I think would disappoint him, though we had a breakthrough in Virginia and North Carolina. On the other hand, to see Iowa, to see New Hampshire, even though he lost New Hampshire, millions of people went to the polls, irrespective of Mr. Obama's race, and said, I think he's the best candidate. Hillary Clinton, to see gender move us forward, and nearly, imagine, it was a black male or a white female who would have won for the Democratic Party. I think he would be excited. Of course he would be disappointed. Remember, when Dr. King died, his Poor People's March was to get us a guaranteed income and national health care. We still don't have national health care, and we have less employment than at the time he died. Unemployment is worse. So he would see us mired down in the quagmire of Iraq, similar to Vietnam of his day. So he would see the lack of advancement. He would see a larger pool of poor people. He would see 9/11 and mourn that. So I think on the one hand, he would be appalled by the lack of progress, but when he would see mayors all over the country, he would see a new black president, he would see shows such as yourself, a black larger middle class any time in history, I think that would be a sign that his work was not in vain.
Can a people, just like a family, can they be successful with no economic stability?
No, I think you have to have an economic infrastructure. We see that with the rise of nations in China. We see that with the disproportionate power that Israel has in the Middle East. You have to have an economic foundation. Kuwait showed us that it's not just economics. There was economic stability. Without military power, Saddam Hussein went and took over their country. Yeah. So you need a combination of both, and we as a community and we as a nation, we still need that economic foundation to move forward.
Okay. What about education? Whatever happened to a mind is a terrible thing to waste.
I think it is a terrible thing to waste. One of the problems is we stop redefining what it means to waste a mind. Too many of our young people are mired in things that do not move them forward. American Idol, all kinds of game shows and sports, disproportionate. I'm not saying those things are necessarily, Mr. Hasan, bad into themselves. I'm saying if you give your child a bowl of ice cream as a dessert, that's fine. If you give them a bowl of ice cream as dinner, you have a problem. We're too often giving our children secondary things as the primary sources of their education. So we should be educating them in the fundamentals of the economics, business, politics, literature, the arts, science, global affairs, and then they have an opportunity for an American Idol. They have an opportunity to watch a Grammy. There's nothing wrong with that, to watch a sporting event. But when it is the foundation, when young people know more about American Idol than Congress, that's when you're in trouble.
Do you see, as you move around across this country, do you see a movement that, other than like your young nieces and nephews who are here in the studio with you, that can look at and say, President Obama, something that wasn't happening back in the day that the president wasn't was the first thing for our mind. Do you see our community position itself to take advantage of that and catapult us in terms of making contributions to this country? Are we just taking it for granted he's president and the work is done?
I don't know if we're taking it for granted. With this financial crisis, it's hard to take anything for granted. I think that you're probably right, and this goes across the board, and in past elections also, people are more excited about a campaign than public policy. Campaigns are big crowds, cameras, lights, shorter in duration. Public policy means you might sit around and talk about a budget for 2 hours. That's just not as exciting as a man getting up promising you things. So I think it's in the nature of the process. On the other hand, I think we see some movement. I emailed today to about 30 different people something called Scoop 44. I saw it on Washington Journal this morning. It is a website, a news website by young college students that's just been started, 44 because President Obama is the 44th president. So on their own, they're taking technology, they do the newscast, they do the research, the planning, the organization, the layout, etc. So young people are showing us, I give kudos out again to the young people from Katrina Leadership Project. I would like to direct people to the website, www.Lorain, LORAINCCC.edu/Katrina.
Do it again.
www.Lorain, LORAINCCC.edu/Katrina. On it, you'll see a dynamic group of young people from all over the country doing marvelous leadership, meeting with congressional leaders, we raised $100,000 in 1 year. We had internships, we did fund drives, we brought New Orleans students and did a summer workshop with them. So I think young people, the KIP program in New Orleans is a new school that has been in response to the Katrina crisis.
20 seconds.
20 seconds. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. Thank you for this program. I think it means a lot to the community. It's making an impact on the nation, and we want to spread the word. And so thank you in celebration of Black History, and congratulations again to the Obama family, and I know they're going to take this nation in good places.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Anytime you're in this area, please let us know. Feel free to do some takes of you, some taping of you, so this community can see you at your best as usual. And I also express my thanks to Comcast for having me here. You have been watching Comcast Community Concerns, where we're always moving our community into the future. Have a blessed day.
You're watching Augusta's very own Comcast C4. It's an Augusta thing.
Drowning in debt. Stop those
TV workout guru Jillian Michaels is back with the ultimate body makeover. These brand.
I was elected chairperson at our January meeting of this year for the Columbia County.
Push, 2 more, here we go, and up, and down, and up, and
Project at Lorain County Community College, small community college about 30 miles west of Cleveland. Came to Augusta to visit family and friends, and in transition to Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, what are you currently teaching, though, you said? I'm
not teaching this semester.
Okay.
I'm doing a leadership program in which is working with college students around leadership development.
Okay.
But my background is teaching English and African American studies.
Okay. Last time we had the opportunity to meet personally was that you was here with the Katrina Leadership Project.
Right.
Why did you decide to start that project, and where's that project? What track is it on today?
The Katrina Leadership Project began as a response to the tragedy of Katrina. The tragedy was twofold from my perspective. One, it was just the storm itself, the devastation that it leveled on the city and the region. The second tragedy was the failure to invest in our young people. And what the KLP was attempting to do was to prepare our young people and to invest in their leadership skills, because they are indeed the future leaders of the generation. And it's not a cliche. And so what we wanted to do is give these young people an opportunity to go to Congress, to meet with congressional leaders all over the country, to learn planning, budgets, organization, as well as connectivity with other students around the country.
So how is that going thus far?
We metamorphosed it into the 360 Leadership Project. Be very frank with you, the Katrina dimension of it often was looked at very narrow by funders, was looked at very narrowly, frankly, even by people around the country. We would say we're with the Katrina Leadership Project. And Mr. Hasan, the response was often, well, wasn't that 3 or 4 years ago? Or the response was, that happened in New Orleans. I live in Washington, or I live in Ohio. What does that have to do with me? And so what we did was we kept the concept, we changed the name to 360. And the 360 concept is to give the students an opportunity to have a 360 turnaround from the dire conditions to an opportunity of prosperity and transformation.
I used to hear you quite often on 94.7 as you call and express your views, and in my estimation, I view you as a thinker.
Thank you.
With that being said, I also heard you express very early support for President Obama, Senator Obama at the time. What drew you to him as a candidate?
Like most of the nation, my first exposure to now President Barack Obama, when he was running for the Senate in July of 2004, and he gave the keynote address in Boston, Massachusetts, had not heard that kind of speech by a politician with that kind of mixture of compassion, passion, intellectual weight, a kind of dynamic passion for young people, and most importantly, a vision that I thought would move the country forward economically, politically. He spoke, I thought, very clearly about the war, and he seemed to be one of the very few people who understood that America is not about blue states and red states, but the United States. And Mr. Hasan, it struck me as not just rhetoric. He struck me as a person who had the skills of a rhetorician, but he had the skills of a politician, and so thus he would be able to move an agenda forward, not just give, great flowery speeches.
When you talk about, you mentioned young people just now, what do you think that was most attractive to young people in general? I know it attracted you to see that he was reaching out to young people, but what do you think made him attracted to them as well?
Briefly, three things. One, he's relatively young himself. At the time when he was running for the Senate, he was around 43. Well, if you're a 23-year-old senior in college, he's two decades older than you. Furthermore, he reached out to the young people, and he made it very clear by his policies that he was interested in the transformation, he was interested in education. Lastly, he, in a very sophisticated way, used technology, and young people understand technology. He mastered the internet, he mastered connectivity through cyberspace, he mastered organizing and bringing young people into a kind of political sensibility that would move them forward. And I think when you reach out to young people, often young people are not as involved because, frankly, we as adults sometimes fail to reach out to them. And then Senator Obama, now President Barack Obama, understood the vitality of reaching out to young people.
So do you think he has changed the face of political campaigning in this country?
Oh, no question. I mean, when you are the first historic African-American to win the presidency, that changes the political dynamic unto itself. But more importantly, even here in the South, the fact that Virginia and North Carolina, for the first time since 1964, went Democratic, since LBJ, is a sign that is moving beyond the red state, blue state. The fact that he was successful in New Mexico and Colorado. These were states that Democrats historically had done poorly in, at least since 1992. And so he was very successful. Even states that he lost, he narrowly lost. And so it was important that he began to remake the landscape. But it wasn't just Senator Obama. I think it's very important that the war in Iraq, I think that began to change the sensibility of America. And then when you had the financial crisis, that I think pushed it over the top for people for the first time to begin to think beyond race and to look for the best politician, and thank God they deemed him to be the best leader for these times.
When you talk about the war, do you really think that as the more he talked about it, he began to really make Americans think about this thing where we had bought into a hook, line, and sinker for the most part? Even if we didn't, we wasn't talking about it, but he began to make that his focal point, an unjust war, and obviously that really got some traction for him. Do you think he put a face to that?
I think he did, and I think one of the strongest things he had was the fact that he came out in July of '02. Remember, the invasion of the United States into Iraq takes place March 19th of 2003. So upon the winds of war beginning, and the then Bush administration laying that foundation in the previous summer, he immediately began to speak out, and he gave a famous speech in Chicago, I believe it was September of '02, in which he came out very strongly, outlined some of the dangers of the war, and rather prophetically predicted some of the dire consequences of the war. And once people saw by '06 that he was right about that, and by the time he announced his candidacy in January of '07, it was very clear to the nation after 4 years that this man had a clear vision and an understanding of international affairs that, frankly, his peers did not.
We talk about him now as a candidate for president here. The Iowa caucus win, how big was that for him?
Oh, I think it was crucial because what it did was it changed the political landscape in the map. Let's be frank, there were many African Americans who, while excited by his candidacy, wanted to take the pragmatic point of view. We have to have a Democrat in at all costs. And, you know, Senator Hillary Clinton at that time was the leading candidate. Her administration, excuse me, her husband's administration had been close to the black community. And there were many people who were ambivalent, even in the black community, of whether he was able to win. Once he won Iowa, that changed the political landscape, set up his victory in South Carolina, and I think it was the impetus that really led him to the presidency.
So when you think about Iowa, once again, I don't know whether you had an opportunity to see some of the presentations that his wife, Michelle Obama, First Lady, made on his behalf throughout the state of Iowa. I don't know whether you had an opportunity or not, but at the same time, what role do you think she played, and what was her role in terms of, well, what impact, I would say, what impact do you think she had in his success?
I think she had and continues to have a tremendous impact. We have to be honest, there's a stereotypical image of black women in America, and Michelle Obama's a challenge to that. Prior to Barack Obama, she went to Princeton. Prior to Barack Obama, when she was Michelle Robinson, she graduated from Harvard Law School. In fact, they met, she was already at a law firm. So standing on her own merits from a working class family in Chicago, she proved herself intellectually capable, physically attractive, highly articulate, very compassionate, and dedicated to a cause that would benefit the whole country. And I give the Iowans credit and the rest of the country credit that they understood that, and that made a tremendous impact and change in the political landscape. Lastly, I think it changed the dynamic of black women and the way they saw themselves. As important as Coretta Scott King was at that time in the era of the 60s, it was usually the man here and the woman standing behind. Barack and Michelle were standing next to each other, and that changed the dynamic of the way people saw it and propelled his candidacy.
Thank you for that. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. We're going to take a commercial break.
The Augusta Regional Airport embraces the vision of Augusta and the CSRA.
As we bring in more visitors, more businesses, this is the first impression that they're going to have of Augusta. We will leverage this asset to a brighter future for the city.
This is going to be such a huge asset to the economy of the whole area.
Augusta Regional Airport. Fly there, fly home.
Welcome back. Once again, you're watching Comcast Community Concerns. I'm your host, Ben Hasan. My guest once again is Professor Malcolm Cash. Professor Cash, before we went to commercial break, you was making mention of, gave some very complimentary words by First Lady Michelle Obama. In looking back also, did the Republicans try to disgrace her or dethrone her in terms of saying that when she made the comment that for the first time that I really feel well about my country or my nation? Did you think that was a big deal as was being led to make out to be?
I think it's a big deal across party lines for white America. I suspect that a number of white Americans really grapple with the reality that America's past means something different to the African American community. I, for example, am expected to be excited about, to celebrate, and to pay homage to George Washington, despite the fact that he owned me, owned people like me, did not think highly of African Americans. And so when they say he's a great American hero, there's an expectation that we will buy into that. Michelle Obama made reference to the fact that for 246 years we were enslaved, for another 100 years legalized segregation for most parts of the country. Arguably, Richard Nixon is the first democratically elected president in the history of the United States. 1968 candidacy or election was the first time that by law, every single person who was legally was able to vote without restriction in the history of the United States. That's 40 years ago. So when she makes that comment, she is referring to a history and a past of pain, and she was acknowledging that we appear to be moving beyond that by not judging then Senator Barack Obama based on his skin color, and I think she was historically correct.
And just now you made mention of Richard Nixon being the first Democratic, so in making that comment, you're not saying as a Democrat, you're saying the process was a democratic process.
The process with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it opened up the vote for the first time across gender, geographic, and racial lines and economic lines in the history of the United States. So nearly 200 years after the experiment begins primarily for white Americans in 1776, by 192 years later, you have an election process still heavy with racist attitudes, but a democratically elected process. And so we cannot move beyond that history in the name of reconciliation. It's important to reconcile, but you cannot reconcile without telling the truth.
Okay. So what about, did you think the Reverend Wright thing would dethrone his candidacy as well?
No, I didn't think it would dethrone it, the candidacy. For one, I thought it was, again, taken out of context. Reverend Wright, September 11th is when the nation obviously was forever changed in 2001. He gave a sermon 4 days later. So it was unfair to attempt to judge then Senator Barack Obama's by the sermon that a man gave in the capacity of as a preacher 7 years prior to that. And so it was attempting to be used unfairly against him. And I frankly agree with Michelle Obama in this regard. I think America has become a more sophisticated and compassionate nation enough to know that one man giving a speech that they may not have agreed with the content would be unfair to try to penalize the candidacy. And also, cynically speaking, when people are hurting, they sometimes vote their best interest and no longer pander to racism.
Did you attend the inauguration in D.C.?
Oh, I did. It was quite exciting. I had a chance to go down there. Was one of 3 million people who was there, or however many were there, and it was exciting. It was cold. But to see so many young people, I think, Mr. Hasan, the thing that struck me, we arrived about 7 a.m., and I was on a train where you literally could not move from one arm to the next. It was packed with young people. They were singing songs. It was reminiscent of what I read about in the Civil Rights Movement. It wasn't just young people, of course, but to see 8-year-olds, to see 15-year-olds, and how enthused they were, and how they had the Barack T-shirts on, and they started literally singing songs and chanting, and not just his name, but chanting freedom now. And so it was an exciting time, and it was an indication to me of where the country is headed in our future, which to me appears to be it's going to be much more inclusive than it has been in the past, and I think that's a good thing.
So what do you think about some of his cabinet picks now? And some of at the same time, some of the difficulties some of them had in terms of their tax issues.
I think that, you know, there was, and I live in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio now, and there was an article in the newspaper, or a letter in the newspaper, and one woman suggested that maybe they should audit every single member of the House and the Senate. Perhaps that's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
We get audited. So it was unfortunate. I don't know that a tax problem should preclude you from being in an appointee position. I don't come down that strong, and I don't say that just because I'm in line with President Barack Obama's policies. Some of his cabinet picks, you know, like most people in the nation, I would have had it be differently if I could have. I would have liked to see it still look more like America, more presence of people who have historically been excluded. Too often, Mr. Hasan, when we talk about race in America, we mean black and white, and we exclude Asian Americans, we exclude the Arab American community, we exclude the Native American community. So I think it's important that the cabinet, that the Congress, that the military, and all of our governmental official positions look exactly like the tax rolls. Everybody's expected to pay, so everybody should be able to participate.
So what are your position on the bipartisanship he has reached out to make happen?
I think it's important to reach out and bipartisan because he ran on the platform that this is not a blue and this is not a red state or even for independence, but we are the United States. And so it's important that if you're serious about that, not as a platitude, but a policy, and that your public policy must have input from people from all spectrums, and not just Republicans, but independents also, who we tend to forget. So if you want to have a policy that is going to be representative of the demographic makeup of people who voted for you, then I think you have to reach out bipartisan. So I support him on that and encourage him, despite being rebuffed by the majority of Republicans, I encourage him to continue down that path. I think it's in the best interest of the nation.
What do you think about Senator Gregg's withdrawal? Do you think that was politics at work?
Political, yes, and I'm glad he did withdraw, because I think that despite bipartisanship, I don't think you can have any Republican. And I think that Mr. Gregg, based on
Say that again, any what now?
I don't think you should have any Republican. I think you have to have someone who genuinely supports your policies. And I don't know much about him, but I started doing a lot of research when he appointed him, and I think that the fiscal positions and the political positions of Mr. Gregg simply are the antithesis of most of what President Barack Obama stands for. So I think it's good to reach out, but I don't think we should just put someone in who's represented, but a moderate who actually respects your policies and who you can work with and who's going to genuinely represent. So I applaud Senator Gregg for withdrawing.
What do you think about, what do you expect from the stimulus package?
I expect great things. I think it's going to take time for going into effect. I wish the House version had passed as opposed to the Senate version. I think there were some major compromises around health care, around unemployment, particularly around education, around aid to the states. But we spent 8 years digging ourselves in. President Bill Clinton left a surplus. After 8 years, Mr. George Bush left us nearly a $5 trillion deficit. You can't change $5 trillion deficit in 6 months. So I think the stimulus pact is one component. People have to remember there's still the TARP, and then in addition to that, you still have a housing plan. So it's not like the stimulus plan is functioning on its own, but in concert with other measures that's being taken.
So what do you, I mean, and even with the stimulus package being there, do you think it's going to give the kind of the jump start that people are really expecting at the end of the day?
Well, I think it depends in great part on how Wall Street responds, and I think it depends on how Main Street responds. You know, FDR said in his inauguration speech in his first presidency, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And the reason that was an important statement is because fear has a psychological domino effect. And I think on the one hand, we want to tell people the conditions and be honest with the people. But if all you give is dire predictions and dire consequences and a drowning of bad news every day, then people are not going to spend, people are not going to invest, people are not going to hire. So I think it's important to have a combination of honest economic analysis, but a sense of optimism and a sense that we can make a difference. And so as a combination of the stimulus plan and a new psychological mood for the country, I think we're on our way to moving back to economic recovery.
So really what I hear you saying that there being a lot of times there's policies and procedures that's in place, but for the most part, the bigger issue is not so much those policies and procedures, it's the people's optimism about what's on the table that has a great impact as well.
That's important to have the optimism, but out of optimism moves, again, not just toward platitude, but policy. Out of optimism has to come bipartisanship. What I saw was a Republican Party that trenched itself in, haven't accepted or refusing to accept that its policies have been rejected by and large by the American people. It is true, 58+ million people voted for Senator McCain, and that's to be taken with seriousness, and I think that Mr. Obama has shown respect for that. On the other hand, he won the election. And the country, not just that he won the election, but 6 Senate seats changed. Not only did 6 Senate seats change, but in '06 was a reshifting of the House and the Senate. So the American people have spoken for the past 2.5 years in a massive way that the policies of old have not worked, and we're moving in a new direction. And so the optimism should come with the bipartisan support from the government. And I'll say this for the Republican Party. The Republican mayors and many of the Republican governors, unlike the senators in the House of Representatives, who are on the front lines, have been much more cooperative with President Obama than we've seen from his colleagues from Congress.
So my next question was going to be, do you see Republicans across the country in many instances trying to become obstructionists?
In my view, yes.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is going to be the outcome of that? Do you think they'll get steamrolled in the process? Because like you say, when you're talking about you living in a state like Kansas per se, can't make payroll, my unemployment check, I'm already unemployed, and here's my, and I am a Republican to make this point. I'm not a Republican official, I'm just to make a point here, and here's my unemployment check or what have you is not coming. Am I going to look at it to see is this a Democrat or Republican? I'm just going to feel the pain that I can't put food on my family's table.
Well, I think the voters are going to have a great opportunity in 2010, perhaps some elections in 2009 in November, to make a decision upon the goodwill that they gave this president to have an opportunity to make a historic change, not just around issues of race, but for the economic well-being of this country, whether the other majority or the other major party operated as an obstructionist or whether they were interested in moving the country forward. My own perception is that they have operated in that way, and that if they continue in that pathway, I think then we have to elect either new Republicans, independents, or frankly change the face of Congress and the Senate even more in 2010.
We're going to take a commercial break, but when we come back, I want you to try to elaborate on when you look at our country right now, what state do you actually see our country in? Because most people have different opinions. It's not that bad. It's much worse. President Obama is peddling fear. Give us your take on how you think the state of our economy. We'll be right back. We're going to take a commercial break.
The Augusta Regional Airport embraces the vision of Augusta and the CSRA.
As we bring in more visitors, more businesses, this is the first impression that they're going to have of Augusta. We will leverage this asset to a brighter future for the city.
This is going to be such a huge asset to the economy of the whole area.
Augusta Regional Airport. Fly there, fly home.
Welcome back. Once again, you're watching Comcast Community Concerns. I'm your host, Ben Hasan. Once again, my guest is Professor Malcolm Cash. Professor Cash, before we went to commercial break, I would let it be known to you that I wanted for you to express your opinion on what you think the state of our economy is. We know there's mixed opinions out there that the president is peddling fear. Some say, well, you know, our unemployment rate is around 7%. Some say it's not that bad. Some say we're just in the natural business cycle. How do you view the state of our economy?
Well, you know, I'm not an economist, but I've been trying to really seriously educate myself over the past 2 years since the candidacy of now President Barack Obama. I felt as if one of the deficiencies in my own education was not being as informed around economic matters as I was about other matters. I think it's a mixture. I think on the one hand, you know, Martin Luther King said, only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. So in some ways, at this moment in which we're going through a struggle is the emergence of a new economic new world order. And that new economic new world order is one reason the United States has been so powerful. We don't like saying this, is we've often been powerful at the expense of other people. Those people are emerging. The so-called third world nations are becoming international players and politically powerful. And so some parts of our pie is a little smaller. And I think, speaking for myself, that that's a good thing. I'm a person who believes that God created all people, and I think all people need to have an equal opportunity at good living. I think it's unfair that what we see in some of the economy where the disproportion of people who are suffering are working class people in America as opposed to on Wall Street. For example, the auto workers, I think, are carrying a disproportionate load in what they have, the massive layoffs, I think, have been dire. On the other hand, the challenge is for average everyday people now to begin to move toward new models of education in preparation for a new information-based technology. And some of these other economies have trained their workers to be multitasked, and so they can drive a truck one day and work a computer the next. This is going to hopefully propel us into the same reality.
You also mentioned that we spoke about a global economy, a world economy. In terms of America as such now that we've come that we are just a consumer nation for the most part compared to what we used to be doing. How much does the cost of labor overall in this country, we have to revisit that issue? Do you think it's an issue that needs to be revisited? In other words, are we pricing ourselves out of a global economy? Case in point, just recently I saw a program where I was saying about steel. Steel needs to be bought here in America, especially with this stimulus package. But let it be known that if you put America on it, then there's going to be some repercussions for that. There was Caterpillar saying that, hey, at the same time, we do business with Russia, we do business with China, they buy our product and service. We can't put America, we are violating international law in doing those things. So what it comes down to, at the end of the day, somebody is saying here, but I'm actually saying it, that we have to begin to look at our working wages all over again. Is that possible?
Well, I think two things. One, I think we're seeing some of the residue of NAFTA. There was economists, mainly to the center and to the left, who warned of the implications of what would happen to labor with the passage of NAFTA. When you shift jobs to third world countries, when you shift them without labor concerns, when you shift them without an economic understanding of the implications for your own local community so you can have cheap goods come back into the country. And so economics take a long time to evolve, and so one of the things that we've seen is it is disproportionately impacting the poor. I think the second thing we have to look at, Mr. Hasan, is in the last 30 years we've seen a widening gap of CEO and white-collar and management's income and wealth in comparison to everyday people. And so one of the things that market capitalism has to do is begin to have a more equitable sharing of a shrinking pie. Our numbers are going up based on immigration and birth and just natural expansion. The pie is becoming smaller. The other thing we have to look at is things that Mr. Clinton tried to implement back in the 90s. Healthcare. Much of the economic crisis for many major corporations is they cannot afford healthcare. I think that the nation needs to move toward a healthcare system where everyone receives the same quality of healthcare that our congressional leaders receive. And so I think when we start to look at new economic models, there is hope for the future, but it's going to call for shared sacrifice, not just people who are on the lower economic stratum.
With that also, from an economic perspective, isn't also we destabilizing our country in terms of the workplace, in terms of, because so many jobs now, so many things are contracted out now. And if I work for someone, almost basically like I'm being sharecropped out. I don't really work for anybody that show up at a job site. I may work just 6 or 7 months, but I'm not necessarily employed by that company. But bigger than that, there's no health care, there's no benefits for me and my family. Are we destabilizing the family as we went down this path over 20-some odd years ago because we're quick to contract things out? And the very same employers that was on the city payroll doing the work, now they're working for a contract, but there are no benefits in place. Have we done ourselves a disservice with that?
I think to some degree we have. I think that the flip side of that is we have, being an educator, we have a poor educational infrastructure. And so many of the individuals who are being displaced from jobs usually are not employable, particularly in a timely manner, in other fields of work. I think the other thing that we have to think about, you know, American people have a kind of closed view often of the world. I'm speaking generally, I don't want to stereotype. And, you know, people from all over the world come to America to work. One upside, if we change the way we view the world, is there's a great opportunity for Americans to go other places and work and have an opportunity to see the world. When the economy is bad in other countries, they come here. Well, here's a chance for many of us to begin to look at other countries, not necessarily to resettle or give up our citizenship, but to begin to interface. This is a global economy, but we need a global cultural dynamic that allows for us to interface with other people. And you're absolutely right. The companies, at the expense of the masses of people, once again, have often cut jobs for the bottom line to please shareholders and to have more profits from the upside without thinking of the long-term consequences. Because let's be frank, if no one's working, who's going to buy the goods that we're producing? The few that we do produce, who's going to be able to purchase them if no one has a job?
You also mentioned about America's venturing out and taking advantage of the opportunities around the world. Is that something that we may be missing as Americans here, that President Obama brings to the forefront, that the whole world is looking at him and embracing him and looking for another opportunity? They're not looking at him as being the President of the United States as much as the President of the world?
I don't know about the President of the world part. I think I'd like to see him, if he can take care of America, I'd be satisfied considering the past 8 years. But I do think what he represents is a kind of dynamic of a world citizenry. And I think that's what you're getting at, not only because of his own integrated past, which most of us have, is just not as visible as his, but I think that his vision. See, you can have traveled all over the world and still be myopic in your perspective. Ronald Reagan traveled all over the world. George Bush has traveled. Many of the, Karl Rove have traveled extensively. These people went to some of the so-called best colleges in the country. It still did not stop them from being myopic. So the spirit of a person and the spirit of the leadership often speaks to where we're going to go in the country. And I feel that many countries all over the world see a new spirit. It's almost as if President Obama being elected reminds me of when Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990. The new leadership ushered in a new possibility, and that becomes a transformative moment within itself. Now you have to move from that transformational moment to actual public policy.
How do you see the African American community taking advantage of that opportunity of what you just mentioned in terms of moving forward? Because most time we know we've been standoffish, rightfully so because of our experiences. But what should we be doing in the forefront? Because you're going to hear this question again pretty much in our second portion, because we will speak directly to some of those issues. But briefly, what are some of how should we position ourselves to take advantage of the opportunity here in America and at the same time move forward and make the more contribution to this country than we ever made before, or should we?
Oh, I think we should. And how will it go? I don't know how it's going to go. I think we're too early into President Obama's administration. I will say this in preparation for our second section. I think one of the main
45 seconds.
One of the main things that we have to do is we have to take advantage of the leadership that the president has shown us on how to use technology to connect, to communicate, and to transform. If the African-American political and economic infrastructure learns no other lesson from President Obama, is how powerful the internet and technology can be as an agent of transformation.
Professor Cash, we thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule for being here. We're going to now go to part 2 of this program and encourage our viewing audience to stay tuned for us next week, when the first question to you would be, if Dr. King was alive today, what would he say about the election? You have been watching Comcast Community Concerns, where we're always moving our community into the future. Have a blessed day.